In just a few moments, I am going to be talking about groupthink. If you've read the book 1984, perhaps you have heard the definition and you know what it is. But if you haven't, stay tuned for this episode. Boy, I sure would hate for you to miss this one. Hello, this is Stephanie, and this is Truth Detective. You know, I am your very own personal truth detective. I love collecting research, evidence, and giving you the facts about society, culture, justice, events, people that will make you more informed about what's going on in the nation and the world. It's so exciting. If you are a new listener here at Truth Detective, I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope that you enjoy it. As always, I go off script a little bit. You know, I often think that we are doomed and depressing ourselves every single day by what we hear and see. And I often tell you to turn off your electronic devices. And I mean it. But lately, just lately, about a week or so ago, I noticed something that was great. Let's see if you've noticed. Have you noticed a resurgence of sorts? A standing up of people that really want to be heard. People that either are for or against a topic. It doesn't matter. People are actually speaking their truth and what they believe, but in a way that is calm and relaxing. And that is so cool. Can we just have the conversation, just have the talk, and be calm and relaxed about it? I am seeing more and more people doing that, and that makes me feel really good about what I put out there as well. If you have a story about that, please email me, truthdetectivepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to know how your conversations are going with family, friends, and acquaintances, anybody that you talk to. I'd love to know how that goes for you. Is it calm and relaxed? And are you able to have that conversation with that person that you weren't able to have, whether it be about politics, social justice, society, culture? Just let me know. Last week after the episode, I got an email from Anne, who was wondering about groupthink. I know I mentioned it in the last episode on brainwashing, and I want to talk about it today. Well, what is groupthink? I hear a lot of people asking what exactly that is on social media and all over the place. People are wondering. We will go to the dictionary for a rough definition before we get deep into what groupthink really is. Well, the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defined groupthink as a pattern of thought characterized by self-deception, forced manufacturing of consent, and conformity to group values and ethics. Well, that gives us kind of a definition, but we want more. If the definition isn't enough, I can always direct individuals to the book 1984 by George Orwell for a perfect example. But not everybody has the time or energy to sit and read 1984, a book that was written with complete clarity and realism in 1948. How did George Orwell know that we would be facing a time in the future when groupthink would be a real concern? Well, because groupthink has been around forever. Well, really a long time. In the United States since about 1930. In last week's episode, I mentioned that people are tribal and love to be in groups. And that's so true. People of all races, nationalities, experiences, and different environments feel at home with their like-minded counterparts. There is no doubt. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. There are the obvious groups, such as demographics due to race, color, national origin. These are groups that are instilled as reminders of cultural values and norms of that set of people. And that's a great thing. These groups have become more prevalent in the last decade or so. These groups have staying power because race isn't going anywhere. And how about the many, many other groups? There have been political groups, Republican and Democrat groups, but also the Green Party, the National Socialist Democratic Party, and so much more. These groups have members that have the same political beliefs and have a set core value system. Nothing wrong with that. But how about groups in general? Groups that make us feel good for the moment or the hour, or when we do those exciting fun activities. These groups don't hurt others and are well-intentioned to make individuals like you and me smile, if only for just a little while. Well, I know firsthand there's a Jeep Wrangler get-together and a Jeep Wrangler group that I love so much, and I feel a part of those people in that group. Then there are motorcycle groups, book clubs, sewing clubs, you name it. You know what? There's a group for it. These types of groups are only interested in that very activity that the members are interested in. All of these types of groups are great. But what about the groups that aren't so great, that are mean-spirited, full of hate, and have an unproductive, negative message behind them? Irving L. Janis coined the term groupthink and published his research in the 1972 book Groupthink. His findings came from research into why a team reaches an excellent decision one time and a disastrous one the next. What he found was that a lack of conflict or opposing viewpoints led to poor decisions because alternatives were not fully analyzed, and because groups did not gather enough information to make an informed decision. And that's the whole idea behind groupthink. Well, how do you spot groupthink? According to Irving Janis, groupthink happens when there is a strong, persuasive group leader, a high level of group cohesion, intense pressure from the outside to make a good decision. That intense pressure from the outside to make a good decision could be the start of something very bad within the group. On the Mindful Tools website, I found this. Watch for these 7 things that indicate a groupthink scenario. Look out, this could get dangerous. How about rationalization? Well, this is when group members convince themselves that despite evidence to the contrary, the decision presented is the best one. It's kind of like those other people don't agree with us because they haven't researched the problem as extensively as we have. Therefore, they don't really know what they're talking about. Well, the next one is peer pressure. We all know about peer pressure. That's when a team member or a group member expresses an opposing opinion, or questions the rationale behind a decision. The rest of the team members work together to pressure or penalize that person into compliance. That is a scary thing. It's kind of like a sentence like, well, if you really feel that we're making a mistake, you can always leave the team or group. Well, we don't like that. How about complacency? That's involved in groupthink. After a few successes, the group begins to feel like any decision they make is the right one because there is no disagreement from any source. Our track record speaks for itself. We are unstoppable. I'm not so sure they are. Moral high ground. Each member of the group views him or herself as moral. When morality is used as a basis for decision making, the pressure to conform is even greater because no individual wants to be perceived as immoral. It's like saying we all know what is right and wrong, and this is definitely right. But is it? Stereotyping? Yep, there's plenty of that too. As the group becomes more uniform in their views, they begin to see outsiders as possessing a different and inferior set of morals and characteristics from themselves. And that is so true. These perceived negative characteristics are then used to discredit the opposition. For example, lawyers will find any excuse to argue, they say, even when the facts are clearly against them. Well, here's a hot one to look out for. Censorship. Of course, members of the group censor their opinions to conform. We see it all the time. It's kind of like, if everyone else agrees, then my thoughts to the contrary must be wrong. Oh, you know what? Watch out for this. Information that is gathered is censored so that it also conforms to or supports the chosen decisions or alternatives. Don't listen to that nonsense, they say. They don't have a clue about what is really going on. Oh boy. Well, how about the illusion? Because no one speaks out. Everyone in the group feels the group's decision is unanimous. This is what feeds the groupthink and causes it to spiral out of control. I've seen it time and time again. I see we all agree, so it's decided then. Well, Maybe we don't agree, and maybe we didn't consent. But that decision was made unanimously. They may not think that, but that's what they want you and everybody else to think. In fact, it is now widely recognized that groupthink-like behavior is found in many, many situations and across many types of groups and team settings. So it's important to look out for the key symptoms. If it doesn't feel right, you know what? It's probably not. Irving Janis was most famous for this theory of groupthink because it described the systematic errors made by groups when making collective decisions. Most decisions shouldn't be made collectively. He cites groupthink as important aspects of deviant religious cult-like behavior. That's not good. From a Fortune magazine article in 1952 by Irving Janis called Groupthink, he says this: a very curious thing has been taking place in this country, and almost without our knowing it. In a country where individualism, independence, and self-reliance was the watchword for 3 centuries, the view is now coming to be accepted that the individual himself has no meaning, except, that is, as a member of a group. In a sense, this emphasis is a measure of success. We have had to learn how to get along in groups. With the evolution of today's giant organizations in business and government and labor and education in big cities, we have created a whole new social structure for ourselves, and one so complex that we're still trying to figure out just what happened. Now, how did he see that in 1952? It's because it's always repeating itself. History repeats itself. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Oh yes, the obsession and curiosity about groupthink was all over the place. Well, from Odessa, America, the newspaper from Odessa, Texas, June 24th of 1960, there's an article entitled Groupthinking. Look, it says here: the process of groupthink robs us of much joy and understanding. George Orwell introduced the phrase groupthink into his frightening book, 1984. But we don't have to wait until 1984 before we can understand the implications and the errors contained in this process. Groupthink is at the root of most of the socialist philosophy. And this, from News Record in North Hills, Pennsylvania, November 27, 1994, an article entitled Trends by Gerald Celente. In the case of journalism, groupthink reporters accept one-sided information from a clique of experts, as well as their own colleagues. The biased information then becomes fact. This hurts your ability to track trends. Trend tracking requires you to maintain an open mind and individuality of thought. But when information comes from a groupthink course, it's hard to think in a different way or take a different point of view. Boy, oh boy, that is so true, especially with the mainstream media in today's world. And then there's this from the Delta Democrat Times, Greenville, Mississippi, May 28, 2015. The article entitled Graduation Gift Ideas for Today's Generation by the great Thomas Sowell, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institute. Well, he says this: my own favorite approach to controversial issues, going back to my teaching days, is to confront individuals with the strongest arguments available on opposite sides of the issue of the day. The point of this approach is not to feed these individuals prepackaged conclusions, but to force them to seek facts and apply logic in their own attempts to resolve complex and important controversies. Well, in this quote from the great Thomas Sowell, one of the greatest thinkers of our time, and I will leave a few links in the show notes if you want to find out more about him. He says here that an individual having their own autonomy is best. Don't be a joiner. Don't get hung up on being a member of a group. Be happy and proud to be a critical, independent thinker. Isn't that always the best way? Don't care what others think of you. Get comfortable with your own self and your own thoughts. And you know what? In recent years, there have been new groups that I had never heard of. Antifa, BLM on the far left, and the militia groups such as QAnon and extremist groups on the far right. Well, so here I have this from the Fairfield Times, Fairfield, Montana, September 24th, 2020. The article is entitled Strange Bedfellows, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and Environmental Nonprofit Mixed Together Are Not a Plus by Chance Gowan. He says this: rare is the individual or group which bothers to dig deeper. Now most strange bedfellows, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and environmental nonprofits mixed together are not a plus. While groups like Antifa and BLM oppress our city, burn buildings, loot businesses, and shoot innocent 5-year-old children while they play in their front yards, all in the name of social justice, the reasons for these attacks are represented as noble. They'll do whatever it takes to further their cause, even if it requires lying, gross misrepresentation of facts, or unleashing brutal violence on the guiltless. Power and money are their rewards, and Chance is so right. So I ask you, what was so special and alluring about some of these groups that adhere to groupthink? What is it? In America alone, I hearken back to a time when the KKK had a huge following in America. That was a long time ago, and some of you may not remember this. But most recently, we hear about Antifa, Black Lives Matter, QAnon, and the far-right militia groups. The participants of these groups live for the inclusion, dedication, and complete submission of whichever group it is. It's a way of life, every day, all day long. These groups plan protests, have meetings, talk about how to win and overthrow the government and other groups that disagree with their own message. Well, these groups will never work together for the common good of America because their views are so different than the other views, and they have no interest in cohesiveness. They divide themselves and, as a result, never ever conquer, never win, and never get the power and control they truly want. They truly are desperate for that, but they'll never win. To give you an idea of these groups, let's look at 4 of these groups and a summary of their activities. When I was young, I remember the Ku Klux Klan. Who remembers that? They were a huge group of hatred. What a way to live a life. What's the history on the Ku Klux Klan? Well, some of you may not know how much of an impact they have had on the United States. Like other hate groups to be wary of, the members of the KKK, as they were known by, adopted white hoods and robes that hid their identities, like many groups that we see today. The KKK acknowledged a American white supremacist terrorist hate group, which primary targets are African Americans as well as Jews, immigrants, leftists, homosexuals, Catholics, Muslims, and atheists. Yowza. I'm getting out of breath. There's so many of them. But their hatred doesn't stop there. The KKK hates almost every other group or person that is even out there on the planet. White supremacy, white nationalism, Nordics, and segregationists are their ideologies. So it's no wonder they hate Christian terrorism, neo-Confederates, right-wing populism, social conservatism, anti-Semitism, anti-immigration, anti-communism, anti-Islam, anti-Catholicism, anti-globalization, and homophobia. Well, the list just goes on and on. Although there is a very long history of the KKK, the modern KKK is not one organization, but rather it is composed of small independent chapters across the United States. And it is estimated that there are at least 29 separate rival clan groups. It is said that that is how many is currently active in the United States, and they compete with one another for members, dues, news, media, attention, and the title of being the true heir to the older Ku Klux Klan group that started way back in 1865. Recent KKK member campaigns have stimulated people's anxieties about illegal immigration, urban crime, civil unions, and same-sex marriage. Klan literature and propaganda is homophobic and encourages violence against gays and lesbians. And since the late 1970s, the Klan has increasingly focused on this previously ignored population. I don't know if I really like this group very much. What do you think? Recently, the Klan has produced Islamophobic propaganda and distributed anti-Islamic flyers. They have focused on opposition to the civil rights movement, often using violence and murder to suppress activities. And it is classified as a hate group by the Anti-Defamation League and other groups. As of 2016, a count made by the Anti-Defamation League puts total KKK membership nationwide at around 3,000 people, while other research finds its membership at around 6,000 individuals. Who knows what to believe? And here's something that rings true to many of these group thinkers that I'm going to mention here on this episode. The kind of thing that these groups are afraid or ashamed to do openly and by day, they accomplish secretly, masked, and at night. Yes, most of these groups, including the KKK, are cowards, and they are afraid to show who they are because of the awful actions that they do and the people they hurt. The KKK has been around so long, and they are really not in the news that much anymore. So here are a few examples of far left-leaning groups, or disruptors as I call them. How about Antifa? Well, Antifa is a far left-wing, anti-fascist, and anti-racist political movement in the United States. We've all heard of them. They also engage in protest tactics, seeking to combat fascists and racists, such as neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and other far-right extremists. There is a willingness to directly confront far-right activists, and in some cases, law enforcement. This sometimes involves social media harassment, violence, and property damage against those they identify as belonging to the far right. Individuals involved in the movement of Antifa tend to hold anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist, and anti-state views, subscribing to a range of left-wing ideologies. A majority of individuals involved are anarchists, communists, and socialists who describe themselves as revolutionaries. Antifa activists' actions have received support and criticism from various organizations and pundits, with some on the left criticizing Antifa for its willingness to adopt violent, direct actions and for being counterproductive. And they are. And very recently, you might have heard about the Natomas Unified School District teacher that was a member of Antifa and trying to get revolutionaries. The whistleblower who reported the teacher, I believe it was a student, made the school board aware of his Antifa teachings. These were activities allowing for students to get involved in the Antifa movement for extra credit. Well, suffice to say, this teacher lost his job, and he does not and cannot get the revolutionaries he was hoping for. Well, the idea in Antifa is the group will go wherever right-wingers go to cause trouble wherever the Antifa members can find them. Antifa really believes that hate speech is not free speech, and so they go to cause conflict, to shut down the opposition wherever they are. Antifa members don't believe that Nazis or fascists should have a mouthpiece, and that's what makes them, oh, so hateful. Well, as hateful as KKK and Antifa are, there's still more. Well, how about Black Lives Matter? Here on the BLM website, there is this. We are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We also believe that in order to win and bring as many people with us along the way, we must move beyond the narrow nationalism that is all too prevalent in Black communities. We must ensure we are building a movement that brings all of us to the front. We affirm the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. Our network centers those who have been marginalized within Black liberation movements. We are working for a world where Black lives are no longer systemically targeted for demise. We affirm our humanity, our contributions to this society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. The call for Black Lives to Matter is a rally cry for all Black lives striving for liberation. Again, a quick reminder, that is from the Black Lives Matter website. But wait, the Black Lives Matter website has all these rally cries and all these beautiful things that they do for the Black community. But hold on now. We have something here. On the Daily Signal website, I found this. America has spent years fighting communism outside its borders, but now a Marxist threat is growing from within the country. Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow Mike Gonzalez says this. He's the author of BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. That's right, Marxist. He says the Black Lives Matter organization has encouraged Americans, especially young people, to embrace communist ideology. In 2020, there were 633 riots coming from research done at Princeton University. And 95% of those riots in which we know the identity of the perpetrator. Can you guess who they were? Black Lives Matter members. Yes, they were included. Through his work, Gonzalez hopes to open people's eyes to the true nature of Black Lives Matter. The leaders of the Black Lives movement are, in their own words, trained Marxists. Marxism is what it says it is. It's communism. It is getting rid of the market economy, getting rid of capitalism, which founder Patrisse Cullors says they want to do. They want to get rid of free markets. They want to get rid of our ability to own property and sell that property or sell our labor for a wage. They don't even like our system of representative democracy. So now let's go back to that article by Mike Gonzalez, BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. He says here they want to abolish the family. In fact, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation had on their website that they wanted to really make deep changes to the family system. Yikes! They hide themselves behind a very good slogan, Black Lives Matter. Who could be against that? If you don't think that Black Lives Matter, I don't even want to talk to you. They hide themselves. If they call themselves Red Ideas Matter, it would be much more representative of who they are. But, of course, like all communists, they hide themselves behind these noble sentiments, like Black Lives Matter. And here's this. Either way of looking at these far-left groups of BLM and Antifa that I have shown you here, there is no way in my mind that you can make sense of this and make this wrong seem right. It goes against the grain of the Judeo-Christian values that America was built on. The Daily Signal website has this. Antifa, which is a much wider phenomenon, are anarchists. They're violent anarchists. As I see it, they don't have a thought. Like Black Lives Matter has critical race theory behind it. They're all practitioners of critical race theory. Antifa doesn't have that. Black Lives Matter does. Antifa is anarchism, and it's just pure violence. Almost for the sake of violence. I think they have goals like overthrowing the state, but they don't have a well-thought-out program. Black Lives Matter has bills in Congress. Black Lives Matter has a curriculum that is being taught in many of our children's schools already, and that's critical race theory. Black Lives Matter has a foreign policy. They came out and supported the communist government of Cuba as the communist government was rounding up protesters, beating them up, and putting them into prison through kangaroo trials. BLM, Black Lives Matter, came out and supported them. BLM, Black Lives Matter, came out in support against Israel, as Israel was fighting the terrorist group Hamas earlier this year. Black Lives Matter is just another anarchist group under the guise of a mission looking to hate. And to sum up this section of the far left disruptors, Antifa, What can we say about Antifa? Antifa is just anarchists looking for trouble, looking for opposition wherever it is, just to cause chaos. Okay, so now that I have discussed the left disruptors, the far left disruptors, I know that you are crazy dying to hear about the far-right disruptors, and there are a couple of them that stick out in my mind. How about QAnon, that officially started in 2016? Here on the rightwingwatch.org website, I found this about QAnon. The spread of QAnon conspiracy theory, which alleges that a secret cabal of satanic cannibalistic pedophiles rule the world and has long used its power and influence to freely murder and traffic children, has reached deep into the white evangelical community in recent years. While such allegations have usually been leveled against Democratic politicians and left-leaning entertainment, media, and business leaders, the conspiracy theory now appears to be circling back around on evangelical leaders themselves. Well, QAnon has been described as a cult, and it has been said QAnon supporters believe in conspiracy theories of all kinds. So we now know that QAnon believe in the biggest and main theory, that is a disproven far-right conspiracy theory alleging that a cabal of satanic, cannibalistic pedophiles operate a global child sex trafficking ring. That's it. The conspiracy theory that has been widely characterized as baseless and evidence-free still rings true to the QAnon believers. Yes, indeed. Its proponents have been called a deranged conspiracy cult, quote-unquote, and some of the internet's most unconventional fans, quote-unquote. These, quote-unquote, unconventional fans are said to be conservative Trump supporters who refer to the storm and the Great Awakening. Well, QAnon's precepts and vocabulary are closely related to the religious concepts and the ideology of the millennials and the apocalyptic scenarios. It is leading to it being sometimes construed as an emerging religious movement. And that scares a lot of people. Well, there is no doubt QAnon definitely has an agenda. But how about the alt-right organizations? The alt-right, an abbreviation for alternative right, is a loosely connected far-right white nationalist movement. The alt-right is a biological racist movement promoting a form of identity politics for European Americans and white people internationally. The alt-right groups reject the liberal democratic basis of the U.S. government and opposes both the conservative and liberal wings of the country's political mainstream. The alt-right's membership is overwhelmingly white and male, attracted to the movement by deteriorating living standards and prospects, anxieties about the social role of white masculinity. Think of the groups like Proud Boys. Their anger at leftist and non-white forms of identity politics are obvious. A hatred of groups such as Black Lives Matter. Alt-right material has contributed to the radicalization of men responsible for various murders and terrorist attacks in the U.S. since 2014. And the critics charge that the term alt-right is merely a rebranding of white supremacy. It's true the alt-right is broadly secular. Many of its members are atheists or highly skeptical of organized religion. The alt-right often looks favorably on Russian President Vladimir Putin, viewing him as a strong, nationalistic white leader who defends his country from both radical Islam and Western liberalism. Favoring a more patriarchal society, the alt-right is anti-feminist as well. So now I have gone down two far-left groups and two far-right groups, and I want you to see the difference between the two. There is no doubt that the idea of groupthink is scary, even if it's an old concept, such as with the Ku Klux Klan, or a relatively new group such as BLM, Antifa, QAnon, or the far-right extremist groups. I became aware of the division of groups taking over with divisive hatred within the last 5 years. Not that long ago, I couldn't escape the rhetoric which was blasted on mainstream media, the internet, and in books, and films, etc., etc. Believe me, it was everywhere, and I know you know that too. But is it necessary in the United States to have these divisive groups? Could we, as a so-called melting pot, that we used to be and used to love being so much live with such hatred for people of all kinds? Weren't we built to be a nation of liberty and justice for all citizens? We have institutions for our safety and well-being put into place for all people. We do. And remember, in the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that there will always be groups that are harmless and well-intentioned, and that is so true. Can we have that again, please? After all, we are tribal. Remember, we love groups and have always loved being in groups and cliques and clubs. There is no doubt. It's harmless. But in our own little groups and tribes, we were and still are happy. And we are, for the most part, living happily and cohesively within the American society, along with all its culture and other groups. But these days, let me tell you, there are some of the groups mentioned here with negative intentions and divisive results, and so much hatred. Will groupthink with its divisive hatred and negativity ever be a thing of the past? And should it be? Is it okay to have groupthink? Remember back on what I said in the beginning of this episode. Groupthink is negative thinking, and it is getting a group to think cohesively and collectively about negative things. Have we learned anything from groups that work within the groupthink mindset? I'll let you decide that. To constantly be fed the groupthink rhetoric and theories, in my humble opinion, are not good for anybody anywhere here in America. There are so many issues in this groupthink mentality, and I could do so much more on this episode, but I leave that to you. I want you to ask the questions and to open a dialogue or a conversation or a debate with someone that you love or someone that you have just met about groupthink. And now it's that time again, my call to actions. If you have the chance, read or listen to the book 1984 by George Orwell. I mentioned it at the top of the episode. It's short and it's informative. And best yet, it's easy to understand the concept of groupthink, and that is so great. If approached by a local chapter of a hate group, such as any one of the ones I mentioned in this episode, question the motives. Question everything. Do research on the group, so you will understand what the message and beliefs are before you get involved. Are they bad? Are they good? It's up to you. At the very least, there will be clarity on your part. When you know more, you can open an intelligent conversation and debate pros and cons of the group in question. If you are so inclined, find a group that allows for fun, productive activities, and that will still allow for your own autonomy. Once again, as I believe and will always tell you, everybody in the United States has the constitutional right of freedom of speech and the right to peaceably protest. The only time that line is drawn is in the event of imminent physical harm and danger to another person. And that means you. And please, if you don't like conflict, if it upsets you, don't post potentially conflicting views on social media. I've learned about that. It's frustrating and may cause actions that you don't want or need to be a part of. And lastly, use your mind, ask questions, be smart, and know that you can think any way you want and at any time, because you are a proud American. In the end, autonomy is a great thing. Individual thought instead of groupthink is the way to go for me. To be authentic and true to myself is something I've been striving for, and you may think about doing the same too. No one is exactly like you, so don't be persuaded to get into a group where you are solely absorbed with doing activities within the group that aren't in the long run serving you well, not calling the shots, or worse, your individual opinions and thoughts are discounted and put down. True hardcore groupthink slowly works on lowering your self-esteem, keeping you, me, and everybody else away from the people that love us the most, your family, your friends, etc., etc. But here's a question. Are Americans trying to get out of boxes and groups? Or are we being told it's good to be in boxes and bubbles? Are we trying too hard to be inclusive with everything we do, Remember, people are group-oriented. I don't know the answer to this, but I do know that we have been in groups for a long, long time, and we have been pretty accepting of the outcomes. And we've been pretty accepting of one another too, up until recently. What has changed in the world and our society? We may want to examine ourselves to see how we became this type of society. Sometimes impatient, intolerant, selfish people only interested in groupthink and following, not leading. Are we like that by nature, or is it being forced upon us? And lest we forget, moving forward in a productive and positive way in this ever-changing world might never be acceptable unless we make it so, one step at a time, one person at a time. It all begins with you. Okay, so now you don't really think that I'm going to leave you at the end of this episode thinking about the negativity that encompasses groupthink. No way. I am going to give you the word of the week. Well, the word of the week on this episode is technocracy. On the Wall Street Mojo website, I found this definition. Technocracy refers to a government system wherein scientists, technology, and technical experts hold political offices and make decisions for the public interests. Are we already starting to see this happening? Perhaps maybe we'll learn about technocracy on an upcoming episode. And I want to leave you with a quote from the website AZ Quotes. Think for yourself. Unplug yourself from follow-the-follower groupthink. Do your own research and set your own conclusions. Set your own course and stick to your guns. When you're just starting out, people will tell you you're wrong. After you've blown past them, and you will, they'll tell you you're crazy. And then a few years after that, they'll privately ask you to mentor them. That's a quote from Steve Pavlina, and that is so true. That's what I want for you today and every single day. If you have enjoyed this episode of Truth Detective, that's great, and I love that. And I would love to hear from you. Email me, truthdetectivepodcast@gmail.com. Go to truthdetectivepodcast.com to get to past episodes, my show notes, and there's a little bio on me if you're wondering what I'm all about. Follow and subscribe Truth Detective Podcast to get the notifications of when new episodes come out. And what is cooler than that? I hope that you enjoyed this episode on groupthink, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.